my name is Caitlin Preston. I am doing my oral presentation over the short story / short essay, Incarnations of Burned Children, written by David Foster Wallace. This particular story was one of my favorites that we read throughout the semester, so of course I really wanted to choose it and write about it and discuss it. So I mainly chose that one because of my likeness to it, but also because I felt like it was one of the best ones to analyze because there's just so much to it. It was such a short story, but there's really a lot buried inside that story, which always makes for a great story. The main concept of the story that I found the most analyticals over was the pain factor in the story. There is obviously a lot of pain being experienced throughout the story, both physical and emotional, maybe even mentally too. Of course, which is obvious, and you can totally almost feel the poor baby's pain through the words that Wallace used. So the baby faced a lot of physical pain, physical distress, physical hurt, just was very hurt from the boiling pot of hot water that fell upon him, and the pain just got so overbearing that at the end of the story, it was interpreted that the baby passed away from the pain that he was feeling, which interpretation is a whole nother concept of this story that a lot of people can take one way or the other. Now, the father, he experienced a huge gush of emotional pain. There was a lot of lack of communication, which is also another huge factor in this story that a lot of people kind of just read over. There's just a lot of no communication in this story. I mean, of course, given the baby is a baby, it's an infant, can't communicate like how you and I can. And the father obviously can't communicate with the baby and ask, what's wrong? What part hurts? Where did it hurt you the worst? There's no communication. There's a barrier there, which made the story the way that it was, because if this was a 5-year-old boy that, got burned, the 5-year-old can communicate way better and let the father know where it's hurting. But because of this barrier, this lack of communication, the baby wasn't able to tell the dad, hey, you're missing it. You're grabbing my arms, my legs, but you're missing my diaper. And that is where the scorching water is just puddled, just killing me. The baby can't do that. The baby has no way of communicating this with the dad. So that is a huge barrier that affected this story the way that it did. So the baby is experiencing the physical pain. The dad's experiencing the emotional pain. He's trying to do whatever he can to help the baby, but he's only doing what he thinks is helping. He doesn't understand where it's hurting. He doesn't understand the kind of hurt that the baby's feeling. It's just a whole bunch of. It's just a huge barrier. For lack of better terms, it's just a huge barrier between father and son, and that is what made this story so powerful, because we, as readers, know what's going on, look from the outside looking in. But when you're the one that's writing, or if you're even reading a first person point of view, you don't always know the ins and outs of everything, and sometimes that can make things really tricky whenever you're trying to understand something, because in order to understand, you have to have communication. The baby distances himself from the pain, like said at the end of the story, whenever the baby's soul is leaving the body. This is what was interpreted, that the baby was, dead or dying from the pain. There is no sentence in the story that just clearly says the baby died from the pain, but it is what is interpreted by the way that the baby dealt with the pain. A lot of people can take that as, oh, the baby was just distancing himself from the pain. He wasn't actually dying, like whenever you have those people who you'll say, oh, I have a horrible headache, and they're like, well, let me break your foot and then your head won't hurt anymore. It's stuff like that. You can do certain things to get your mind off of the pain, and it just eases it. Of course, it doesn't get rid of the pain, but it can ease it. And who's to say that that's not what the baby was doing? If you're like me, you probably think that the baby died. But if you're looking at both sides to the interpretation aspect, there's one of two ways that could have happened. Now, the father dealt with his pain emotionally and in a lot of anger, a huge bout of anger. From the get-go, as soon as he realized what happened to the baby, he immediately started blaming the mom, saying that, not exactly saying that she was irresponsible, but you could basically get that from his attitude that she was irresponsible. She shouldn't have been doing whatever she was doing. She should have been keeping an eye on the baby, that this was all her fault that this happened, So from the get-go, he automatically is blaming the mom, which I think is wrong, because while the mom should have been being a little bit more responsible, or maybe just not cooking or something while her baby's left unattended, or not leaving the stove unattended, or however it was that the story happened, of course there could have been something to avoid it. The mom still should not have been so, made out to be the bad guy, because we only got one part of the story, And now, also, the father, at the end of the story, he's like, well, I need a cigarette, and a lot of people use cigarettes to say that this is clearing my anxiety, it helps me feel better, So the dad is just, he's trying to distance himself from the emotional pain that he just saw his baby suffering through. Of course, any parent is going to suffer through the pain also with the loss of a child. But I feel like I said before, this could have it could have been resolved, but with the circumstances given, there was a baby, it was an accident, there was no communication. With those circumstances, there's nothing that you really left to analyze with the story, because that's just how it was going to happen. Maybe if the baby wasn't wearing a diaper at all, that never would have happened. I know my brother, when he was a baby, would like to run around butt naked, never wore a diaper, really, unless we were going out in public. So, that could have been another thing to push off the possible interpreted death of the baby. So basically the story is just, it's ended and it's left off with interpretation. Does the baby die? Did the baby live? What happened to the father? What happened to the mom? The mom's barely discussed throughout the rest of the story, except for when she's being blamed for what the baby did. There's a lot of different questions I had reading this story, but that's really what grabbed me and interested me the most. I just wanted to keep reading it and try to figure it out for myself. In this story, like I said, it's just up for interpretation. It's how you interpret the story. And this was how I interpreted the story, that it was just all about the different kinds of pain and what happened, and maybe it was just inevitable. But so I'm interested in how other people interpreted it. I loved reading and researching the stuff about the story, because it was so interesting finding everyone else's point of views on how the story played out and what each aspect of the story meant to them. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you weren't too bothered by my weird lisp, because I just had my wisdom teeth taken out a couple days ago. And thanks again for watching, and have a good day.